Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about the 3.20 update to my Caustic Arrow Ballista Trickster. Now, this was my starter last league, 3.19. At the time, I was kind of like hesitating to actually tell people to play it because obviously I couldn't really test it before, so I was kind of like, we don't know. Covenant got buffed. We're going to go into that, and that is kind of why I played this build. Now, for this patch, there has been some changes, which I'm going to talk about, but when it comes to the mechanics itself, if you're interested and if you're new to the build, definitely check out the 3.19 video. I'll link it down in the description. As well as that, the updated POB will be down below, and if everything goes well, we'll also have a completely written guide on max roll whenever it releases, so that will be like 2 days before the league, maybe even closer. I don't know exactly. It always takes a lot of time because the patch notes are so near to release. But yeah, if that happens, I will also link it down below. So that is everything you need to know if you're new to this build. Basically, all the mechanics I have described in that video. I will not make the same video again. It's obviously useless. Rather, I would like to talk about a lot of things that people have been asking since last league. The biggest one is CA Ballista versus EA Ballista, and then we're going to go into 3.20 changes. Now, this was by far the question I got the most, obviously because they're both Ballista builds, Caustic Arrow, Explosive Arrow. What should I play? If I got $1 for every time somebody asked this, I wouldn't be making this video. But let's go into it. CA Ballista, what are the pros? It has incredible recovery. Trickster is insane when it comes to totem builds. In case you did not know, if a ballista kills an enemy with damage over time, it counts as your kill, basically making polymath outrageously good. The biggest struggle ever that ballista builds have is recovery. It is incredible that this fixes it so well. So polymath basically gives you like 7, or I think in this current version 8% life on kill. That's just incredible. Everybody who ever put on Blood Drinker, which is just 2%, knows what that means. Also, energy shield recovery, which means we don't even need ghost stands. At first, I wanted to go for ghost stands, and it was in my initial POB. It is not in my updated POB anymore because it just doesn't do anything. You're always on full ES, and against bosses, usually you can avoid stuff, and then it goes back up anyways. Also, the mana on kill helps as well. Now, in the new version, I'll probably use life tap, so that doesn't matter too much, but it's still nice and cozy to have. That is the biggest upside. And I want to just make clear that you understand, CA Ballista for me overall was a lot comfier than EA. Now, we'll go into some of the downsides, especially if you're a new player. It's a lot harder to pull off. But the way I could just walk through maps without ever having to think about anything was really, really fun. So that is a huge upside. I just want to point that out. Better endgame scaling with Covenant and Darkscorn. The whole reason I made this build last league is because Covenant got buffed. Socketed gems are supported by level 29 added chaos damage here. If you can see on the left side, with decent gear, this is round about 10 to maybe 13 divines invested. I have 13 mil DPS, and the reason is basically Covenant. Look at what happens if I remove Covenant. Now, here's the thing. Covenant prices are completely dependent on the meta. We know now it is a rare unique. However, for reasons that I will disclose later, I think it will be less expensive. That being said, what I mean with less expensive is it's not going to be 5 to 7 divines as I was last league on Leaguestart, which was obviously rough for a lot of people, which is why I would stay away from this build if you just want something safe or you don't know how to make currency on Leaguestart. If you're a new player, don't play this build at all. Now, second thing is Darkscorn. Last league, this wasn't actually that expensive. It was like 50 to 70 C or something. I think 1 divine at some point. This bow is very, very good. It's not as important as Covenant, but still incredibly nice to have, especially because of the physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage, which, if you have enough chaos resistance, makes up for some of the build's weaknesses we're going about in a second. And also at the end here, and that's a big deal for a lot of people, it has no delay damage. Now, obviously, I'm saying that knowing it is a poison build, but what I mean is, if you compare it to EA has the explosion charge, which takes a second. So some people don't like that. It's less responsive. So that's definitely a pro for a lot of people. Now, let's go over the cons. The first one here, this, depending on who you are, might actually be an upside, but this build needs to level with Poisonous Concoction. On EA, at level 38, if you have like 2 leveling uniques, which cost you probably less than a chaos, you can just start off. However, with this build, you want to go with Poisonous Concoction roundabout until level 70, 75. That being said, if you've never leveled with Poisonous Concoction before, I'll just say it is the smoothest experience ever, especially now that Spectral Helix got nerfed. I think this is actually the most comfy leveling in existence. It's unarmed, so you don't have to think about upgrading too much other than your defenses. In terms of offenses, you're basically set sort of like a spell, but even better. That being said, if you're somebody who just wants to play its skill from the beginning or as early as possible. This build cannot do that. So I'll put it in the con section here. This build is not Solo Saffron friendly at all. And just to make you understand, in early game, I don't have these in here. I have a Tabby, I have Snake Bites, which cost like a couple of C. It's really easy to do. But in end game, when it gets to like invitation bosses, like the harder invitations, like for example, Feared, Hidden, Uber bosses, you will need Covenant and Darkscorn. And since these are pretty rare, right, which doesn't say anything about the price, but it's just rare, on Solo Saffron, you're not going to get these. And if you never have the chance to get these, I probably wouldn't even recommend the build at all. At that point, there's better options. EA Ballista is incredible on Solo Saffron. And then another con, especially for early game, will be you will have worse defense against physical hits in general. So as you will come to see, this build actually doesn't use determination. We do not have the space for determination in this build, and there is no armor scaling in our region here. EA has way better access to that. And the way we compensate this in endgame is we get Darkscorn, which has 25% of physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage. That's basically reduced chaos damage if you have a chaos res up, which you will have anyways. And then secondly, we'll have Taste of Hate, which will make it so 15% of physical damage is taken as cold. These two together will reduce the incoming physical damage round about by 30%. On top of that, to go up to like 40% damage reduction or something, you also have physical damage taken as fire, and then the implicit can be whatever, right? It can be taken as lightning, whatever Eldritch implicit you hit, it doesn't really matter. Obviously, since you have a Taste of Hate, cold would be the GG. In general, something that you also have to remember here is that while Elementalist has an elemental shield, so it doesn't help against physical, so we need determination, this build has Heartstopper. And I want you to realize how good Heartstopper is on softcore. On hardcore, right, sure, it's a strong effect, but you want to always be tanky. There is no way you ever want to die. On this build in softcore, Heartstopper is actually incredible. Now, dots are a huge problem. So out of every 10 seconds, half of the time you take 40% less hit damage, and half of the time you take 40% less dot damage. Overall, I went into this league and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to use this, but there's nothing better. After putting it on, you feel it so much. It's so good to a point that I will probably never play a Trickster build without it. It's sort of like Polymath for me. So in total, I would say that in endgame, the physical damage reduction is as good as EA Ballista, but you have to get your items. So once again, not Solo Saffron friendly. So yeah, that's basically it. If you want me to tell you what I enjoyed more, I think I actually enjoyed CA Ballista a little bit more, but I don't have any problem getting currency. I have a lot of time to play. I know how to get currency early and get Covenant and Darkscorn. So if your situation is different, you might want to do EA Ballista. Overall, I would say CA Ballista is the slightly stronger version, with EA being so much safer, and EA is also your #1 choice if you want to go Solo Saffron. And obviously, if you hate Poisonous Concoction, definitely don't play CA Ballista. You'll be playing until like level 70 or 75 with that. But now let's get into the changes for 3.20. Now, the first thing I want to talk about are the curse changes, because they have shaken up poison builds quite a lot, and people want to know what the hell happened, because Despair got a really huge nerf. So basically, the way it worked is before it gave minus 29% res. This is now like minus 30, which is basically the same for all intents and purposes, but it lost the flat damage and it lost the increased damage from damage over time effects. Now, the flat damage kind of helped until you got Covenant, but after that, it didn't really make that much of a difference. And the increased damage from damage over time effects also wasn't that big, because Wither, and you always have Wither up on Caustic Arrow, that's the big thing about the Helm enchant or the quality, right? So basically, if you have Wither up, this is only like 9 to 10% more damage. It's not as big as it seems. That being said, Despair is now a lot worse on rings. So basically, Curse on hit got changed in a way where level 1 gems are now worse. As you can see here, level 1s are minus 15 instead of minus 20, and you don't get increased effect anymore of curses. However, Temporal Chains actually got mega buffed, and that is because the way it works now is curses do not have less effectiveness against bosses anymore, which is where you usually needed it the most. So the thing here is 66% less effect of your hexes against bosses. Now that is insane, right? That's basically, if you had 100% effect, your effect is basically on 34% of what it usually is. Getting that back to 100, that means your curses now have 200% more effect against bosses. And even though the nerfs for Despair were really harsh, overall, that will kind of even it out against bosses. Now, Temporal Chains, when it comes to Temporal Chains, this actually got really buffed because other effects on cursed enemies expire 40% slower. What this meant is you have 40% increased poison duration. The reason I didn't have it on my build before is poison duration is something you really want on bosses because their fights take longer, so you can make use of all that duration. But it had reduced effect on bosses, so exactly where it needed to shine, it didn't, and now it does. This actually now gives you 40% more poison duration, more multiplier. And the biggest thing about this is that in the end game version, you can still have Curse on Hit, because Temporal Chains does not scale with levels. Curse on Hit is level 1, but the 40% does not scale. It's the same on level 1 as level 20, so later we can have Temporal Chains just on our Glove Corruption, for example. Stuff like that. So in this case, you would really want it on your Snake Bites. I will edit that. And before that, all you will have is an Arcanist Brand Despair Temporal Chains set up against bosses. So overall, better boss damage, worse mapping damage. I did the math on this, but it was kind of like, it was not exact. It seems like the boss damage is round about 40% more, and the mapping damage is round about 30% less. So whatever you prefer. The only thing that changed here that is a must-have now is you need to use 2 curses now. Because of how strong curses are and because of how League Starts usually go, unless you really want to buy bosses, which my builds are usually made so you can do your bosses, you should have 2 curses. So that's basically TLDR of the curse changes. Now, the best possible way to do this would be Anoint Whispers of Doom, but Whispers of Doom will be extremely expensive because it costs golden oils times 3, which are already the rarest of the normal oils. And on top of that, curses got buffed for everybody, so a lot of people will want this. I'll just chime it in there. This is definitely the best option. There's also 2 unique options. The first one, which I put into the budget kind of section and also the end game section for now, until you get a lot of currency, is Doter's Damning. This gives you an additional curse, a little bit of resistances. The rest is kind of meh, but it's not like you get too much on rings anyway, so it's not the end of the world. If you can get a corruption like Bleed Immune, that would be insane. The second option you have, and this is what I have in the early game option, is Wind Screams. These are basically budget boots, which give you an additional curse. The main problem for endgame is they don't give you spell suppression. And since in endgame you're going to use Covenant, you won't be getting any spell suppression from your chest, which means if you're using Wind Screams, it's going to be incredibly hard to actually get spell suppression capped. So this is only something I would use for early. I want to make a small section here about Vaal Caustic Arrow real quick. If you didn't know, this one got released earlier today. Let's just play it real quick. This is going to be Vaal Caustic Arrow. As you can see here, it basically shoots an arrow and it kind of leaves down ground effect. Now, there's a few problems with the skill and why I don't think this is going to do anything for the build. Now, the biggest one is Ballistas actually can't use Vaal skills. Now, you might think, yeah, but you can cast it yourself. Well, you could, but then there's also a second thing. We're scaling poison. Don't forget. We don't care about the ground degen, and since I don't know the gem details right now, but it seems like it's not going to have any hit damage, it's mostly about the ground degen, right? The whole stuff with Caustic Arrow is probably more of an oversight from them, so they're not going to design the Vaal Caustic Arrow accordingly. So if you're looking for a Vaal Caustic Arrow build, this is definitely not the one. It doesn't look that potent anyway. I mean, we don't know the numbers. Maybe it's insane. Overall, we're not going to be using Vaal Caustic Arrow in this. There's only one circumstance where we would use it, which is if it has some kind of debuff, like, I don't know, enemies on degen ground have minus 15 Chaos Res. In that case, 100% use it. Then I want to talk about Covenant and Darkscorn prices. Last league, I said, I think Covenant will be very expensive. I think Darkscorn will be very expensive. I was half right. Darkscorn wasn't really that expensive, but Covenant definitely was. How about my Covenant on day 1 for 5 Divines? A lot of people had to buy it on day 2, day 3, day 4 for like 7 Divines. And once again, you don't need it 6-linked. A 5-link Covenant still doubles your damage, so that's how good this chest is and how important it is for the build progression. And Darkscorn was actually a lot cheaper than I thought. I thought it would be like 3 Divines. It ended up only being 1 Divine and dropping off pretty damn quickly. But let's talk about what I think will change. For starters, and I don't know, I couldn't find the patch exactly, but I know also talking to people that there was a patch in the middle somewhere where they made it easier to get uniques overall during 3.19, which wasn't available at League Start. And what I remember, Covenant kind of went down in price at that point. I just looked it up, and it seems like the patch must have been round about here because this is where the fall started. Now, as you can see here, this is like looking at 20, 30, 40C. Do I think it's going to be that price at League Start? No, I think it's probably going to be round about here, but I cannot make those predictions, right? I don't know. Like, for all I know, there might be somebody coming out with a League Starter that everybody plays and has Covenant, so definitely keep your eyes open. All I want to say is this climbed up pretty damn fast with people also playing my CA Trickster, but with me not playing it this league, probably going to be a lot cheaper anyways. But yeah, this is roundabout where the patch hit. Overall, I just cannot really say. However, another factor in why Covenant might be cheaper this league is Lightning Strike and Spectral Healers got destroyed. And a lot of people played stuff like Poison Lightning Strike, Poison Spectral Helix especially. And since they both got nerfed, those people will not want Covenant anymore. There's actually not that many builds that can use Covenant to its full extent anymore. It's really good on attack builds, on spell builds. It's so, mainly because of how the damage scaling works on attacks. And because weapons at League Start usually suck, right? You don't have a good weapon. You don't have much base damage. That's what Covenant gives you. The level 29 added chaos damage and still a 6-link, right? So overall, I think this will definitely have an influence. And then also, as for Darkscorn, Darkscorn is very specific. Like, there is leagues where Darkscorn is literally 10C at League Start. So I haven't seen anybody post a Poison Bow build yet. So if nobody will, other than me, last league we had Tuna also play Scourge Arrow Ballistas, which he isn't going to do. He's going to BV Poison this time around. So overall, yeah, it should be a lot easier to get Darkscorn. And then just a quickie at the end here, because Reign of Splinters is actually really important for this build. In EA, it's basically just a nuance, right? Gets you better clear. It doesn't increase your single target damage. Here, Reign of Splinters is insane, right? And it is now only available from Corrupting Jewels, which should actually be an upside. These corrupted jewels before were incredibly easy to get. They were an outcome of you just putting a Vaal Orb on any Crimson Jewel. You had a chance to transform it. And that happened, like, I think 1 in 4 times even. So theoretically, it should be easy. However, we don't know, right? They could re-tier it. Maybe for some reason it's now going to be 1 in 40. I just cannot know. I just wanted to tell you that this is how you now get Reign of Splinters. The only small downside in like end game is you can't really get Corrupted Blood on them anymore, simply because they already come corrupted, right? When you transform them, you don't get an implicit. You're not going to get that. You're going to have to get it somewhere else. So what is the conclusion for Caustic Arrow overall? First up, the curse changes means you really want a double curse setup. I would say it's mandatory now. Both Despair and Temporal Chains are now actual no-brainers. Whether you have to cast them with an Arcanist brand only against bosses, or you have a curse on hit setup, is up to you. I will update the POB a little bit. Once again, will be down in the description. Vaal Caustic Arrow will probably suck for the build, and that's mainly because we're not scaling the dot of Caustic Arrow, which it seems what the Vaal skill is obviously about. If it has some kind of ground degen where enemies take more damage, have minus res, definitely included. It doesn't really cost you anything other than maybe Vaal charges from a Vaal Grace or something. I also think that Covenant or Darkscorn will probably be less expensive than last league. All the reasons I already listed, right? The patch, the meta, but definitely keep your eye open if other builds are using this. This will kind of mean whether you have to get 4 Divines or whether you might have to get 10 Divines at some point. So that is definitely a big part, which is also why I always say don't play this if you're a new player, and definitely don't play it if you're on Solo Sapphire. As for Reign of Splinters, this could go either way. It's now a corruption-only unique, which should mean it's more affordable and way easier to get. It could be like a 2C unique on day 1 for all I know with current rarity, but they might also re-tier it. We don't know with GGG. They sometimes like to do that. And once again, everything, the build guide with the full description on how this build works, the leveling, all of that will be down in the description, as well as the updated POB. And whether you play this build or not, I wish you a great league start, and see you around. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, it was a great build in 3.19. One thing I will say about this build is it kind of made 3.19 a lot easier. If you guys remember Arch Nemesis, it was kind of a slog, and I didn't have any problems, which I was very surprised by, which is also why I wanted to update this video. I think in a league where Arch Nemesis isn't as suffocating anymore, this build can really shine. Once again, if you're a Solo Sapphire or you're a new player, definitely stay away from this build. Get some experience, maybe play it another time. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.